Natasha,
Debbie,
show.
the show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way.
Hi, welcome to the Natasha and Debbie show.
What's my name? No, don't you dare turn that off. Don't you turn that off. What is my name?
Your name is lovely wife, Natasha.
Whoa. That was so... What did you say?
I have no idea. My tongue got all twisted up in there and did some cartwheels and yeah.
She's just going to turn it off. No.
I was going to turn it off.
No. We hit 20-year anniversary and it's like, I don't even really know your name. So that person over there that always sits there.
Hey, you.
All right, Victoria. Oh, Debbie. I mean, who's Victoria?
I'm like, where'd you get that?
Sorry. Welcome to the Natasha and Debbie show.
There you go.
We're glad to have you guys here today. Thanks for joining us. And in a second, we're going to tell you what we're doing, which is something that we don't typically do. But before that, Debbie has words that you've never heard her utter before. Go for it.
If you like today's episode, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel. But don't take our word for it. Check out some of our content and make your decision if you want to join our family.
Just hit the button. Just hit the button.
It's really easy.
You know you want to. It's peer pressure. Let us know if it works. No, it didn't. They've all unsubscribed. No, in all seriousness though, today we're going to do a video. This is not the type of content we typically do, but we do like to look back at history. Mm-hmm. And this is part of it. Now, I wasn't looking for this video. It just kind of popped up. I think probably because Halloween right now, of course. And I think that's why it popped up. But it's called Village of the Damned, the haunting true story of, I'm going to try to pronounce this right, Eyam, the Derbyshire Plague Village. So just looking down at the bottom, this is about the Black Death. And I can't say I know much about that, to be honest with you. Never heard of this village either. And Derbyshire, we know very little about you. So this, I think, will be interesting.
It's going to be a great learning video.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting. But the title is kind of freaky. I'm not going to lie. Again, Village of the Damned, the haunting true story.
So we need to learn this history.
Yeah, so I'm interested to know what happened here. A little scared, not gonna lie. Okay, I'm not scared, but a little creeped out by it.
Creepy, that's a better word for it.
Creepy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys know this or not. Let us know in the comments if it's something that's well known over there. It's, of course, we don't know, but we're about to find out together. So here we go. It's the Village of the Damned, the haunting true story of Eyam, the Derbyshire Plague Village. Okay, that music's creeping me out, not gonna lie.
In the year 1346, a deadly plague began that ripped through the world, killing around 1/3 of the population.
That much?
It continued to disappear and reappear in waves, and the very mention of its name, the Black Death, would strike instant fear. The spring of 1665, it returned once again to the shores of England.
300 years later?
Spread quickly through the city of London. Expanding disease and death wherever it went. Over 150 miles away, in the peaceful Derbyshire countryside, sat the village of Eyam, its inhabitants blissfully distant from the chaos and destruction that was sweeping through the capital.
Okay.
That was until late August, when a box of cloth from London arrived at the door of the village tailor. And it is with this box of cloth that our story begins.
Stop.
We're going to cover the moving story of the Plague Village, a tragic tale of a community who sacrificed everything to save their neighbours. It's a story of death and destruction, with some heartwarming tales of the real people behind the narrative. So please sit back, relax, and if you can, enjoy the video. If you do enjoy it, please let us know by liking it at the end. We'd also really appreciate if you could subscribe to the channel, and this will help you see similar content in the future. Thank you. The Derbyshire village of Eyam is a beautiful place, set in the heart of the Peak District National Park.
Oh, okay.
Today it is like many picturesque English villages of its kind, but the village of Eyam has a dark and terrifying past that continues to fascinate historians and visitors alike.
Really?
In late August 1665, the village tailor ordered a box containing materials from London to make up clothes for the villagers. Received by his assistant, George Vickers, the cloth on arrival, as tradition would expect, was damp, and so George laid it out in front of the cottage fire to dry. Vickers, we are told, became ill shortly after opening the box.
No.
It is now believed that the cloth harboured either rat fleas or their eggs, carrying the bubonic plague, and that they were released when the cloth was unfolded and shaken.
Stop.
Though normally feeding on the blood of rats, they were not fussy and leapt instead to the unbeknowing George, who soon became Eyam's first victim to die from the disease.
Wow.
The bubonic plague is a disease that strikes quickly, and within about 5 or 6 days of the appearance of the first symptoms, Vickers was dead. This sparked a trigger of similar events throughout the community, starting first with the other members of the household. In just a couple of weeks, on the 22nd of September, Edward Cooper, also living in the cottage, would die. The following day, on the 23rd, the burial of Peter Hawksworth, who lived close by, was recorded. On the 26th, Thomas Thorpe, another neighbour, was buried, to be followed on the 30th by his daughter Mary, who was just 12 years old.
Okay, pause on here.
On the same day, Sarah Siddle, whose family lived on the opposite side of the road.
Sorry, pausing. Okay. Wow.
That's a lot and quick.
Oh man. Just from ordering the cloth. That cloth that came in. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And look at this right here. Like this 9 members of the Thorpe family lived here. They all died in all those names. Oh
That's
my
so
gosh. That is
sad.
so sad.
Incredible.
That is so sad. And so they have a museum here. That's what that was.
Yeah, that's nice that they're doing something to remember what happened.
That's so
Kind of-
terrifying though, you know?
It is.
Huh. Okay, I just need to take a second there because that's a lot and I didn't.
It is.
And also suddenly too. Wow, back to it. Sorry, the space bar's not working today. I don't know why.
Was another victim. It is estimated that around that time there had been around 800 inhabitants living in Eyam. By the end of October 1665, the death toll was already at 29.
Jeez.
By this time, the villagers were becoming accustomed to the symptoms of the bubonic
That thing
plague,
freaks me
which
out.
usually started with a fever, headache, chills and weakness. Swellings or buboes formed with one or more of the lymph nodes becoming tender and swollen, usually in the groin or armpits. It is from these buboes that blood and pus often seeped.
Look, hold on.
Victims
Why
usually
is it-
underwent damage to the skin.
Sorry, I'm pausing right there. I just look at this picture here. That is horrifying.
Yeah, it is.
Lord have mercy on London. Keep out. That is that. Okay, pictures say 1,000 words, right? That one
They
does
sure
right
do.
there. I've heard of the Black Death. I've heard of
Yeah,
bubonic
we've heard of
plague.
it, but not really looked into it to
No,
see.
I know
much
we
more
learned about it at
about
school like a little bit, but that was 500 years ago. Well,
Right.
it was. I don't remember it much, but I never really paid attention to like what it did.
Mhm.
You know, the symptoms,
Yeah.
what it actually did to the body.
Or even how it spread and,
Yeah.
how people got it.
Wow. I'm gonna sort of wind that back about 10 seconds to that picture again with the
With all the bumps,
sores and
yeah.
things. That looks horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing they show with the mask,
Yeah,
is that
What's
really
that
like a
symbol?
thing? Is that a thing?
yeah.
Because I've always seen that in like pictures and things and movies even. That scares the crap
I
out
wonder
of
if
me.
that's what the doctor wore, like
Like I guess a
face
mask
mask back then.
or not. Again, apologize for the ignorance. Just don't know. But it scares me. Okay, back to it. Which won't work with the spacebar. Sorry. There we go.
Swollen, usually in the groin or armpits. It is from these buboes that blood and pus often seeped.
Ugh.
Victims usually underwent damage to the skin and underlying tissue until they were covered in dark blotches,
Jeez.
which is what famously gives the name the Black Death.
Okay.
There were a host of other unpleasant effects, including vomiting, diarrhea,
Jeez.
delirium, and terrible aches and pains.
Horrible.
The suffering of the victim would usually end with their inevitable death.
Yeah.
The onstart of any of these symptoms filled the victim and their family with fear, and often home remedies were concocted to ease the suffering.
I hope they
Most
help a little.
people trusted in the use of herbs around them, and some women put their trust in sweet-smelling flowers, which would freshen the malodorous air.
Oh, man.
The medical profession had no idea what caused the Black Death, let alone how to cure it. Many cures had their roots in herbal medicine. Other so-called cures were quackery or fueled by religious fear-mongering. Living in the village at the time was a lady by the name of Margaret Blackwell. Margaret was in the final stages of the plague, and her brother left the house expecting on his return to find her dead.
Okay.
During these final moments, Margaret, having developed an insatiable thirst, reached for a jug of bacon fat, believing it to be water, and downed it.
And?
Miraculously, when her brother returned, Margaret had recovered and for the rest of her days maintained that it was this unknowing home remedy that had in fact saved her life.
Pause, hold up. What?
Wow.
She survived it?
She survived it, but is that what really helped her?
Well, it had to.
I don't know.
It had to.
It obviously did something for her.
What? He said she was the final stages.
Mm-hmm. But how does bacon fat?
I don't know, animal proteins. Maybe there was a lack of protein back then too. I'm sure there probably was. I don't know. I'm going to search this up on Google though and look that up. That is fascinating. And thank God for that, for her.
Yeah. And interesting, I was trying to read what herbs they were supposedly using.
Okay,
back
it's
then.
not herbs. We're American, but right now we're talking, we have to say the H. Herbs.
Herbs.
For our British friends. I didn't even look at them. I was too busy listening to this. Is fascinating, but also, how did her brother not get it though? That was my other question.
Yeah.
It's a bubonic plague, right? Because I've heard that still exists on our planet, though. Remember back during when COVID first happened, me and a friend were talking about that, and I didn't know it still exists on this planet.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's good to learn all of this history, and so that we can learn from it.
Sorry, I'm stuck there.
I know it's mind-boggling.
Wow. Okay, let's get back into this. Sorry, that's fascinating.
Margaret was an unusual case, however, and for the majority of the bubonic plague victims, death was inevitable. Later on in this video, we'll also look at another survivor, the local grave digger. However, his story is not without tragedy either, and we'll touch on this a little later.
Okay.
As winter came and went, the deaths in the village started to decline. We now know that the bubonic plague was a disease caused by the bacterium Yersinia pests that circulate among wild rodents. Plague among humans arises when rodents in human habitation, normally black rats, become infected. Normally it takes 10 to 14 days before plague has killed off most of a contaminated rat colony, and so the hungry fleas turn on the humans. The fact that plague is transmitted by rat fleas means plague is a disease for the warmer seasons. It usually disappears during the winter, or at least loses most of its spreading power. In May 1666, there were just 4 plague deaths in Eyam, and it is understandable that this brought fresh hope to some of the villagers.
Until it gets warm.
Sadly, this was in vain, for in June 1666, the numbers began to rise again, with over 20 deaths having occurred.
Jeez.
It was at this point that the village rector, William Mompesson, decided that drastic action needed to be taken. With the absence of the squire and the wealthier residents, who had in fact fled at the start of the outbreak, Mompesson realised that the village needed a leader to control the situation. There were, however, other problems facing Mompesson. The village had just emerged from a very troubled period. The villagers, it is said, were mostly Puritan and admired greatly their previous rector, Thomas Stanley. Stanley had been outed for political reasons, and so this created a challenging time for the newly appointed and much younger William Mompesson. Stanley was a staunch Puritan and had served the village for many years. He was well respected by the community. With such big boots to fill, it was no wonder that the new rector met with some resistance from the villagers. Stanley remained local on the edge of the village, and it is believed that some of his most loyal followers met in secret to continue worship with him. Mompesson was no fool. He saw and felt the depth of despair around him that was being created by the Black Death. He also knew that he would need to work with and not against his predecessor. And so the pair continued to see their neighbours fall sick and the bodies pile up in their graves, and they set aside their personal conflict for the good of the village.
Good.
300 years ago, Eyam was a truly remote and isolated spot. The roads used by today's visitors had not been built,
Right.
and the approaches to the village were by the rough, narrow tracks that are still taken to view some of the ancient memorials of the plague days.
Wow.
However, the plague, as everybody knew by now, could easily spread out if not contained, and it was feared that if it escaped Eyam and entered the nearest towns of Matlock, Chesterfield, Buxton, and even Sheffield, the devastation and loss of life would be phenomenal. It was at this point that the villagers, as guided by Mompesson and Stanley, agreed to seal their fate by confining themselves to the village and accepting their lot. A decision that marks them out in history for their selfless self-sacrifice in order to protect their neighbours.
Now that's some...
The rules were as follow. No burials in the graveyard. No gatherings. Church services were to be held in the open air, and the congregation was to keep their distance from one another. And most important of all, quarantine for the entire village.
Is it really year
It is without
1666?
surprise that this drastic action would meet with resistance. The Black Death was ripping through the community and taking no prisoners. It was accepted that to quarantine would mean succumbing entirely to the darkness that had plagued their families for long enough already.
That's rough.
With the guidance of Mompesson and Stanley, it was finally agreed by the whole village that they must sacrifice themselves. As God-fearing people, they were to compare this act of selfishness to Christ dying on the cross in order to save the world. News of the pact travelled to the neighbouring towns, and boundary drop-offs were arranged.
Hang on, I have
Because
to...
without food and medical...
Pause right there. How many politicians would do that today?
None.
Right? I'm just saying. But what? Wow. I know this was a long time ago, but respect for these men.
Mm-hmm. That they cared so much about their fellow people in the world that they wanted to help contain it.
And they knew if they stayed there, that's it.
Yeah. That's incredible.
You'd like to think that you do the same in these situations, but I think it goes back to what I always say. You never know what you're going to do unless you're actually in the situation.
Exactly.
It's easy to say and point fingers and go, I would do this. Or you don't know. You know, you don't know until you're in the situation.
Yep.
So
you got to live it. I mean,
mass respect to them.
yes.
Okay, sorry, I have to keep using the mouse because I don't know why the space bar doesn't work.
I don't know what's going on.
Here we go.
medical supplies, the villagers would starve, that is, if the plague didn't finish them off first.
Oh, that's true. How would they get
Still
food
in
in?
location today between Eyam and the nearby village of Stony Middleton, there lies a constant reminder of this important lifeline. The boundary stone is where supplies were left and collected without human contact. Holes were bored into the stone in which coins were deposited, submerged in vinegar for its disinfectant properties.
What?
Letters and medical supplies were also left.
Okay, I'm rewinding that back to look at that again. Look at that.
What an important stone.
That's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Look, that is, and look at the holes. They put coin. Wow, that is so
incredible.
fascinatingly neat. Now, I'd love to visit that
Yes.
and pay respects and just to stand there and look at that and know what occurred hundreds of years
the
ago.
significance of that stone.
Yeah,
Yep.
that was a lifeline. That is a lifeline right there.
Yes.
That's not just a rock.
You're absolutely right.
Wow. Sorry, I'm moved by that. Like that moves me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's get back into it. Sorry, guys. I keep getting the space bar.
Disinfectant properties.
Wow.
Letters and medical supplies were also left. Goods were also left at Mompesson's Well, as it is now called.
Okay.
This being a substantial well on the edge of the village and used for the exchange of payment for food and other essentials.
Wow, that's so cool.
It is now listed as Grade 2 by Historic England.
Should be grade 1.
At this time, the news of what horrors were unfolding in Eyam spread to the nearby Chatsworth house. The Duke of Devonshire arranged for supplies to be deposited at his expense.
Sorry, I'm pausing again.
No doubt the Duke also...
We're getting ready to do a video on Chatsworth House, and it's right there, and I did not know that.
Well, be a good lead-in.
I'm rewinding that back about 10 seconds because I want to hear that part again. Here we go.
Folding in Eyam spread to the nearby Chatsworth house. The Duke of Devonshire arranged for supplies to be deposited at his expense.
Okay.
No doubt the Duke, also fearing for the lives of his family and his estate, were glad to assist in the lockdown of Eyam. The decision to quarantine evidently became the wisest choice.
Yeah.
With the summer heat, the death toll began to rise once again. In July 1666, 56 people were taken by the plague, and this was followed by a further 78 in the month of August.
That's a
With
lot for that
quarantines in
village.
place,
Yeah.
it was the responsibility of the remaining family members to bury their loved ones.
That's
No longer
unbearable.
allowed to bury the deceased in the churchyard, it became custom to lay the bodies to rest in the gardens and fields surrounding their homes.
Seriously?
For such God-fearing people, the decision to lay eternally in unhallowed ground could have been as terrifying as the onslaught of death itself.
Oh, really?
One heartbreaking story tells of Elizabeth Hancock, who buried her husband and 6 children in just 8 days.
Oh, are you kidding?
When there is
Wow.
nobody left, who buries the last family member?
Mm.
The Talbots, who were neighbours of the Hancocks, caught the plague first. The infection swept through them, and it is believed that through neighbourly compassion, one of the Hancocks buried the last of the Talbots. This decision would in turn cost them the lives of their own family. Soon after this, the Hancock family began to fall sick, and the first of them died on the 3rd of August, to be buried by Mrs. Hancock in the field around her home.
Jeez.
By the 10th, her husband and the 6 children were all dead, and each day that week, as the people of Stony Middleton in the valley far below trudged to the boundary stone with their supplies of food, they saw her at her melancholy task. Finally broken and distraught, she was one of the few people who fled the village to seek refuge with her one remaining son who lived and worked in Sheffield.
Okay.
The graves of the Hancock family are now protected by the National Trust and have been
Good.
named the Riley Graves after the name of their farm.
Okay.
For the majority of the people who caught the bubonic plague, the result was a slow and painful death. There were, however, rare cases of people, like the previously mentioned Margaret Blackwell, who recovered. One such man who recovered was Marshall
the grave
Howe,
digger?
a lead miner who lived at
No.
the townhead. His name goes down in history as having the luck of the devil.
What?
Marshall, believing that he had been saved for a reason, quickly appointed himself as the village gravedigger.
Oh, okay.
There were families who, for reasons of ill health, old age, or extreme youth, had nobody to dispose of the victims, and Marshall saw an opportunity to help, in exchange for some kind of financial reward. Families were expected to pay a fee for his service, and when that was not available, he took fancy to take from the deceased estate whatever he saw
Seriously,
fit.
dude? No.
History tells us 2 sides to the story of Marshall. He's either the grave-digging hero who came to the rescue
Or
of
a
people
villain.
during the darkest times of their lives, or he's an opportunist
Yeah.
who boasted of what treasures he'd acquired during this sad and difficult situation.
Yeah.
I'll let you decide. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
I mean, she
Either
laid
way,
it out.
some say karma played a part eventually, as his heartless attitude was overcome by his own personal tragedy. For along with the many other victims of Eyam were included his own wife and 2-year-old child.
Oh, no.
Many believed he may have brought the infection to his own door. It would have been easy for him to have been the means of transferring into his home a flea from the corpse he was burying, or in the items he had claimed for the burial fee. There was a great fear of the corpses spreading infection, and it was considered essential that they were disposed of quickly. Without any usual pomp or ceremony, they were dragged hurriedly to their resting place as soon as possible, usually by means of a sheet or blanket wrapped around the armpits, or perhaps a simple rope tied around the ankles. In his Journal of the Plague Years by Daniel Defoe, it tells of the practice of burying the dead in graves 6 feet deep, in the hope that at such a depth there was no fear of infection rising from the tomb. In the village of Eyam, there are stories of bodies being buried in groups, as for instance in the Miners' Croft. In some cases, so was the urgency to bury the dead that the grave would be dug before the plague had completely finished the victim
I'm not
off.
surprised by that.
It wasn't unusual for a dying man to hear the thud of the shovel next to his window as he lay in agony waiting for it all to be over.
Could you imagine?
Through this haste,
No.
the years of the plague are awash with stories of people being buried alive, as impatient gravediggers neglected to check that the victim was definitely dead.
Wait, what now?
There are
No.
many
Hold
stories
on,
of the people
hold on,
of Eyam,
hold on.
and I could continue
Hold
for
up,
much longer.
hold up.
No.
Did she... Rewind, hold on. I didn't hear that right. I want to hear that again. I did not just hear that.
People being buried alive, as impatient gravediggers neglected to check that the victim was definitely dead.
I was actually thinking that a few minutes ago when they were talking about rushing them off to their burial.
Oh, you know that happened.
Wonder, yeah, how many people were actually still alive, which is terrifying to think of that.
That's one of, my biggest fears in life is, like, suffocation. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm legit freaked out right now.
I think most people's, yes. That would be absolutely horrible. But I mean, how do you stop that? I mean, fleas spreading.
I don't
this.
know, Debbie.
I mean,
I don't think you do.
how can you control that? And the rats having it, and then it gets on to other animals, and it just seems like, how do you control that? How did they control that?
I'm thankful I didn't live in that time period.
Oh, most definitely. Definitely glad we're
Mm-hmm.
where we are now.
Okay, let's get back into this because this is really disturbing me right now.
There are many stories of the people of Eyam, and I could continue for much longer, but I'll finish off with one of the last deaths in the village.
Okay.
Up to this point, the Reverend Montpesson had avoided the clutches of the disease, despite visiting his parishioners and continuing to be active in the village. His wife, Catherine, however, was not so lucky. When the plague first struck, Catherine begged William to take her and the family away from it all, but he refused, saying that his duty lay in the village. Eventually, it was agreed that their children would be sent to live with friends in Yorkshire, but Catherine chose to stay with her husband, a decision that would cost her her life.
But the kids left.
Having accepted her role beside her husband, Catherine worked tirelessly, visiting the sick and dying, until late in August 1666, when she too fell victim.
Dang it.
One of the symptoms of plague was a rather sickly sweet, cloying sensation in the nostrils. And one evening in August 1666, as she and William were returning to the rectory after hours of work, she is said to have exclaimed, "How sweet the air smells."
Weird.
A sentence which filled Montpesson with alarm,
I
as
bet.
he realised its deadly potential. She had never been strong and was unable to resist the disease, and so died a few days later.
Days.
Catherine was buried by special arrangement in the churchyard, for this was some time after the decision to stop burials here. Her tomb now lies near to the ancient cross, which stands on the south side of the church. Her grave is now the only known plague grave in the churchyard.
Okay.
It is recorded that there were no more plague deaths after the autumn of 1666, and Montpesson ordered the burning of bonfires throughout the village to destroy anything that might have harboured the disease.
Smart.
In the 14 months of horror they had endured, the death toll stood at 260, and a high percentage of the population had perished. Farms and homes were left abandoned, and livestock roamed without rule. It was time for those who remained to start to rebuild their lives.
Wow.
What an incredible video. I'm glad we got to learn about this.
I don't know if I want to say I'm glad. I'm disturbed by it, obviously. I feel a lot of emotion watching that one. Like she was a really good narrator, is she not?
She's very good narrating.
Yeah, like I would feel like I was watching a movie
Very good storytelling.
at the same time because I could visualize everything she was saying.
I mean, that's a lot. 260 people and it was
800, I think.
800 and some
Yeah.
people in the
Yeah.
village
Yeah.
altogether. I mean, that's a high percentage.
Yes, it is, and hearing the individual stories, like the families, down to like, who buries the last family member? That one lady had like, I don't remember the time period of her whole family, her husband, her children.
Yep.
Oh gosh, this just
Her
trying to
husband,
imagine
kids.
going through that.
I can't. I'm glad that we learned about this.
Yes,
Because,
I
those
agree.
people died and they suffered, and we got to hear their names. We got to hear their stories.
Yeah, at least a couple.
And that's why I'm glad that we got to.
I agree. And just thinking of their resolve, their strength, their commitment to each other, to helping each other. Wow.
Yeah, and to basically, commit themselves to locking down and quarantining themselves. I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
To do that to yourself to try to protect others.
It's just a hardcore time, back then. I just, again, so thankful I didn't live then.
Much harder life back then.
Absolutely. But like you said, I'm glad we learned their names, some of them, some of the stories of some of the people, and total respect to those folks back in that time period in the village, and also London too, that went through this as well, to be able to care and help others when you're going through something so horrible. Probably knowing for sure you're going to get this thing.
Yeah.
And yet still going out and his wife at the end, she was still visiting people, helping them out. That's amazing. such, the human spirit is still there, no
Mhm.
matter what. You know, it just is. It always has been. It always will be. People will always do, not all people, but most people will always do the good, right
There will
thing.
always be good people in the world.
And that's the lesson I'm going to take from that.
Exactly.
It sounds weird to say this, but if you like our content, hit the like button. I'm not going to say if you like the video. You know, one
Right.
likes to hear that kind of thing. And consider subscribing to the channel. If you guys know more about this, please in the comments, leave us a comment. Let us know more. It is, history is, you know, it's fascinating in all ways, good and bad, and scary and sad. But it's something that's, you know, we didn't know about. So,
but even through this horrible story and this horrible event, there were some good things that were to be told from it. People giving of themselves.
Absolutely.
The communities working together to drop off the supplies at the border rock. I mean, that's cool.
That border rock, I still think that was one of the coolest things ever.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of the Natasha and Debbie Show. Until then, guys, please, love like jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.